Hello, my name is Michael T. Young, and I'm going to recite from my collection The Infinite Doctrine of Water, which was published by Terrapin Books in 2018. I'm going to start with the first poem in the collection, which is called Advice from a Bat. Hunt only at night. Fly erratically. Defy even your own expectations. Feed on beetles, moths and mosquitoes, whatever is small and annoying. Cultivate the myths about you until every predator fears your legend. When hunting, be guided by a language only you can hear. The same is true when courting the one you love. Clean fangs and fur nightly. Crawl or climb to confuse the observant. Retreat to a cave no one believes in. Let the day and the world pass while you sleep, and sleep upside down, ready to wake and fall into flight. This next poem was inspired by a photograph of my wife, which was taken by a friend who's a photographer and poet. This is called Bioluminescence. Old philosophers would call this look melancholia, but I see in this photo of my wife thinking weathers of competing beauty, someone who can be in two places at once, there on the couch, leaning into the cushion folds, and somewhere else, focused on the unseen, beyond the clock's exhausting rap, working an idea like dough into the necessary bread. All moments of clarity, narrow like this, the periphery dimmed as in a Rembrandt, his philosopher in meditation, sitting in a shaft of light, as if at the bottom of a well, because the profound leads into dark places, like the ocean floor, where the only illumination comes from the bodies of fish swimming through its miles of perpetual night. This next poem is called Sage. None of my dictionaries define it as a color, and yet my wife tells me it's the color of our wedding, her dress, my tie. I take her word for it, but feel no wiser. I sometimes find it in the tiles of some mosaic, or fired into a mug now on clearance at the store, and I'm suddenly connected, rooted, though it depends on the light, as color always does, changing with air densities and angles, shifting with the hours, aging, like the plant that is this color's namesake, its leaves like fingers pointing in every direction, as if it knew something. And this poem is called The Generosity of the Past. In our apartment, there was always light, splitting through the windows like mercy, illuminating bookshelves and what we thought, our conversations or our glasses of wine, lifted to toast each day of generosity, the quantity surpassing what we knew. We read our books, discussed the world we knew, interpretations shifting with the light. We lived by an aesthetic of generosity, art and music painting our world with mercy, although diluted by several bottles of wine, and so reduced to memory and thought. Sediment in the bottles was like a thought, a remnant of the past and all we knew. Nights listening to Liszt or tasting wine, arguing over how things changed with light, how sometimes saying nothing is like mercy, and disagreeing was a generosity. The simplest things are forms of generosity, like paying bills or making tea with thought for how you like it, sugar, a little mercy. We knew that once, but then forgot we knew. So when we changed, We blamed the changing light and turned to vinegar like aging wine. But then we'd drink just anything: old wine, bad scotch, tequila, though still generosity, a generosity that took no delight, not in our books, not in a word or thought. We toasted to the past and what we knew, began the long goodbyes with little mercy. If time allowed us to forgive, that's mercy. And I recall with every glass of wine, because it's who I am and what I knew, and I am thankful for the generosity of that time, for its store of meaning and thought, which are to me here now a kind of light, for it's a light that makes a spectrum of mercy, colorful thoughts as deep and rich as wine, a generosity that's always new. And this poem is called Seed. I prefer reading history in a flowering of dirt and cooked mud, the glittering text of macadam after rain, the squirrel's risky acrobatics in the mulberry, leaps from limb to telephone cables, the occasional fall and hard thud. The beauty of this daring makes a stage of my backyard, makes the page of a story, printed in the very enactment, an image I carry with me, like a book of hours, or the stained glass panels of Sainte-Chapelle, telling the whole story from creation to the end of the world, in images and colors, radiant with struggle. This poem is called Paperclip. I learned that in an interview to enter Oxford, they might ask how you would describe infinity. And I thought about once being asked how I would describe a paperclip to an alien, that is, to someone who's never seen one. It was a writing exercise that made me think of how I would describe the autumn mountains where I grew up, and I decided that they are the color of whiskey and intoxication and exuberance, which might be a way of describing a paperclip, that is, a wire that's intoxicated, wandering in circles, swiveling on its heels as it makes its way out to meet friends that it embraces, holds together in a maudlin circle of endearment, all of which is also how I think of the infinite. And I'm going to end with the last poem in the collection, which is called The Voice of Water. It sounds like grape leaves shaking. It cushions like thick grass underfoot. Its currents spread beyond the range of mountains, which is why sometimes people mistake it for the distant trickle of the sun setting. The error depends on which way they're walking, and if the wind is blowing from the north or south. It licks your fingers when you wave, and only by its tongue can you tell if the person you're greeting is a stranger or some distant uncle. Comforted by one of its many dialects, your neighbor grins from his porch, cigarette in hand. When it whispers with the same heaping hush of salt pouring from an uncapped shaker. Because of its excesses, it remembers. Even after you've closed the book, it keeps reciting the lines. Thank you for listening.